Welcome to the AskJunior Judgment Podcast. I'm Priya Sharma, and joining me today is Ben Carter.
Hello, everyone. We're excited to dive into today's landmark case, S.P. Gupta versus Union of India, a 1981 Supreme Court of India decision that shook the foundations of the Indian judiciary. This case tackled monumental issues surrounding judicial independence, appointments, and transfers of judges. Get ready for a deep dive into constitutional law, Indian politics, and a fascinating clash of opinions at the highest levels of the judiciary.
Ben, this case is incredibly complex, involving multiple writ petitions, essentially lawsuits challenging government actions filed in different high courts across India. Can you give us a quick overview of what sparked all this legal fireworks?
Absolutely, Priya. At the heart of it all was a controversial circular letter issued by the then Law Minister P. Shiv Shankar in March 1981. This letter proposed a policy to improve national integration within the judiciary by ensuring that 1/3 of high court judges in each state came from outside that state. This wasn't a new idea. It had been suggested by various commissions and bar associations over the years. But the way the law minister tried to implement it, by asking for judges' consent in advance, is what ignited the controversy.
So the government wanted more national diversity on the high courts, which is understandable. But asking for consent beforehand seems like a procedural misstep. Why did that cause such an uproar?
Exactly. The petitioners argued that this preemptive request for consent undermined the established constitutional process for judicial appointments. The Indian Constitution mandates consultation with several key figures: the Chief Justice of India, the Governor of the state, and the Chief Justice of the High Court before appointing a judge. The petitioners argued that obtaining consent beforehand rendered this consultation a mere formality, essentially a rubber stamp. They saw it as a direct threat to judicial independence, a cornerstone of Indian democracy.
Let's unpack that judicial independence concept. What does it mean in the Indian context?
Judicial independence means the judiciary is free from undue influence from the executive, the government, or the legislature, parliament. Judges must be able to make decisions based solely on the law and their conscience, without fear of reprisal. In India, this is especially crucial given the country's history and its ongoing efforts to balance a strong central government with the autonomy of its states.
The case also delved into the role of additional judges. What's the difference between an additional judge and a permanent judge in the Indian system?
An additional judge is a temporary appointment, usually for a period not exceeding 2 years, to handle increased workload or arrears of cases. Permanent judges, on the other hand, serve until they reach the age of retirement, 62 in this case. The difference is crucial because additional judges have less job security, potentially making them more susceptible to political pressure.
And that's exactly what the petitioners argued, right? That the short-term appointments of additional judges, especially the 3-month extensions given to some, were a way to exert control.
Precisely. The petitioners argued that these short-term appointments, coupled with the law minister's circular, created a climate of fear and uncertainty, undermining the independence of the judiciary. They also challenged the practice of appointing additional judges while permanent positions remained vacant, arguing that this was a way to circumvent the need for appointing more permanent judges.
The case also involved the transfer of judges between high courts, governed by Article 222 of the Constitution. What were the key arguments surrounding this?
The petitioners argued that Article 222 should be interpreted to require a judge's consent before a transfer. They argued that a transfer without consent was essentially punitive, a way for the government to punish judges for unpopular decisions. The government, however, argued that the article allows for transfers without consent, provided they are in the public interest and after consultation with the CJI.
This brings us to the fascinating aspect of consultation under the Indian Constitution. What does that actually entail?
The court clarified that consultation isn't just a formality. It requires full and effective discussion with all relevant information shared between the President, acting on the advice of the Council of Ministers, the CJI, the Governor, and the Chief Justice of the High Court.
The court emphasized that the consultation must be based on identical information, allowing for a meaningful exchange of views. However, the government isn't bound by the opinions of the consulted authorities. It can make its own decision, but that decision must be based on relevant considerations and not be mala fide, bad faith.
So the court didn't say the CJI's opinion had to be followed blindly, but it did carry significant weight. This case also raised the question of locus standi, or standing to sue. Who can actually bring these kinds of challenges to court?
Traditionally, only those directly harmed by a government action could sue, but this case expanded that concept, recognizing the importance of public interest litigation.
The court held that anyone with a sufficient interest, not just a busybody, could bring a case to challenge government actions that harm the public interest, even if they weren't directly affected. In this case, the lawyers arguing for the petitioners had a sufficient interest because the actions challenged directly impacted the independence of the judiciary, which is vital to their profession.
The case also involved a fascinating debate about the disclosure of documents, specifically correspondence between the law minister, the CJI, and the Chief Justice of the Delhi High Court regarding the non-appointment of certain additional judges. The government claimed privilege, arguing that these documents were confidential and their disclosure would harm the public interest.
This is where the case gets really interesting, Priya. The court had to balance two competing public interests, the need for transparency and accountability in government versus the need to protect confidential communications within the government and judiciary. The court ultimately ruled in favor of disclosure, emphasizing the importance of transparency in a democracy and the need for judicial review to ensure the government acts lawfully. They acknowledged that there are some categories of documents that should be protected from disclosure, but this wasn't one of them.
The court's decision to order the disclosure of these documents was a significant step towards greater transparency in the Indian judicial system. It also highlighted the tension between the need for secrecy in government decision-making and the public's right to know.
Exactly. The court's decision was a landmark moment, demonstrating a willingness to prioritize transparency and accountability, even when it meant potentially challenging established norms and practices within the government and judiciary.
Ben, what was the final outcome of the case?
The court dismissed most of the petitions, upholding the law minister's circular letter as constitutionally valid. However, they did find that the short-term appointments of additional judges were problematic and that the government's decision not to reappoint S.N. Kumar was flawed due to inadequate consultation. They also quashed the transfer of Chief Justice K.B.N. Singh, finding that the consultation process had been insufficient.
So while the court didn't fully overturn the government's actions, it did send a strong message about the importance of due process, transparency, and judicial independence. This case remains highly significant in shaping the understanding of judicial appointments and transfers in India.
Absolutely, Priya. S.P. Gupta versus Union of India is a reminder that even in a system with checks and balances, vigilance is crucial to protect the independence of the judiciary and ensure accountability in government. It's a fascinating case study in constitutional law and the ongoing struggle to balance power and transparency in a democracy.
And that's all the time. We hope our listeners found it informative.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone. We'll be back next time with another landmark judgment to explore on the AskJunior Judgment Podcast.